Western leaders are warning the war in Ukraine could last for years and sustained support will be required to defeat the Russians.
In Ukraine, where officials say a critical infrastructure facility near the capital Kyiv.
Sirens, generator hum, a radar screen in the dark. Somewhere over Ukraine, another wave is already on the way. And that is the real story here. Not slogans, not summit speeches, not another package with a nice press conference attached. Ukraine needs air defense now, because every night Russia is trying to turn the sky itself into a weapon. And what makes this story sharper is that one of the most interesting British systems in that conversation is not moving toward Ukraine. It is moving the other way, into the Gulf, because NATO is now juggling 2 missile and drone crises at once. By the end of this, you will see why the question is not simply, why won't Britain send the weapon? The real question is, what happens when the same small pool of high-end air defense assets is suddenly needed in 2 theaters at the same time? Start in Ukraine, because that is where the shortage becomes visible in the most brutal way. Reuters reported on March 30th that even Ukrainian companies are now forming their own air defense units, tied into the national network, with employees trained, armed, and sent onto combat duty to shoot down drones over places like Kyiv. That is not a gimmick. That is a country stretching every available layer of defense because the pressure is relentless. When industrial workers are being folded into the air defense architecture, it tells you Kyiv is not dealing with a temporary inconvenience. It is dealing with sustained saturation. Russia keeps sending Shahed-type drones, cruise missiles, and ballistic threats in combinations designed to force terrible choices about what gets protected and what does not. Power plants, repair yards, command posts, rail nodes, cities. Everything cannot be covered at once. That is the battlefield problem. Everything else in this video comes after that. And this is where the title needs a little honesty. The British weapon Ukraine is begging for is not really one magic British silver bullet sitting in a warehouse with a ribbon on it. What Ukraine actually needs is more of a category. British-controlled, British-operated, or British-linked high-end air defense capability. The best symbol of that right now is Sky Sabre, Britain's modern ground-based air defense system built around the CAM interceptor. It matters because Sky Sabre is designed to deal with exactly the kind of modern aerial threat mix that defines this war. Aircraft, drones, and cruise missile class dangers, tied together through networked sensors, command and control, and launchers. Britain itself describes Sky Sabre as its most advanced ground-based air defense capability. And MBDA says the CAMM-based land system is built for integrated, layered defense with 360-degree coverage and the ability to engage demanding targets, including saturation attacks. In plain English, this is not an old point defense relic. This is one of the serious tools in Britain's box. So why does that matter now? Because while Ukraine is desperate for more protection in the sky, London has just committed more of that same family of capability to the Middle East. On March 31st, Reuters and the British government both reported that the UK was deploying Sky Sabre to Saudi Arabia, placing its lightweight multi-role launcher in Bahrain, sending Rapid Sentry to Kuwait, and extending Typhoon operations in Qatar. Nearly 1,000 British troops were being committed across the region to install, integrate, train, and in some cases, help operate those systems. This is the critical point. British air defense capability is not idle. It is already booked. The radars, launchers, crews, battle managers, maintenance teams, and fighter cover are being woven into Gulf defense networks because Iran's missile and drone attacks have made those networks urgent. Britain is not choosing between doing nothing and helping Ukraine. It is choosing where a very finite set of defensive assets will stand watch tonight. That changes the entire frame of the story. For 2 years, the dominant explanation for why some systems do not go to Ukraine has been escalation risk. And yes, that still matters. Western governments have always worried about range, basing, crews, and the political symbolism of sending particular capabilities into a live war against Russia. But in spring 2026, there is a second constraint sitting right on top of that one. competing demand. Reuters reported on March 4th that a prolonged Iran conflict could divert scarce U.S. air defense missiles away from Ukraine, especially PAC-3 Patriot interceptors, which Gulf states also use against ballistic and drone threats. Zelensky openly warned that a long and intense war involving Iran could reduce the air defense systems available to Ukraine. That is not theory anymore. That is inventory politics. And inventory politics can be more unforgiving than diplomacy. This is where Britain's role becomes especially interesting, because the UK is a military middle power with world-class niches, not a bottomless arsenal. Sky Sabre is good, but there are not infinite batteries. Typhoons are excellent, but pilots, maintenance crews, spare parts, tanker support, and operational hours all matter. A modern air defense system is not just 8 missiles on a launcher. It is radar coverage, a command node, data links, electronic discipline, protected positions, resupply, trained crews, and the confidence to hand responsibility for defended airspace to that system. Britain's own official descriptions make that clear. Sky Sabre is a 3-part architecture of radar, command and control, and launcher, with Link 16 integration and distributed components that can be spread across the battle space. This is exactly why moving such a system is never as simple as putting a launcher on a truck and saying good luck. You are moving a mini ecosystem. And there is another uncomfortable truth here. Even if London wanted to send a frontline Sky Sabre unit to Ukraine tomorrow, that would not automatically solve Kyiv's problem. Sky Sabre is a medium-range system. It is powerful, flexible, and very relevant against cruise missiles, drones, and aircraft. But Ukraine's most terrifying high-end threat remains Russian ballistic missiles. And Reuters notes that Patriots are still the only effective weapon in Ukraine's arsenal against those ballistic threats. That means Sky Sabre would help, perhaps a lot, but it would not replace Patriot. It would thicken one layer of the shield, not complete it. And that matters strategically, because every system in Ukraine has to be judged by what layer it fills. Short-range guns and jammers are cheap but local. Medium-range systems are valuable but finite. Top-tier anti-ballistic systems are even scarcer. Ukraine is not just begging for a weapon, it is begging for a full architecture. That is why the human scene in Kyiv matters so much. Picture the logic chain. If Ukraine cannot get enough top-end interceptors, it has to conserve them. If it has to conserve them, more drones and lower-end threats must be handled by cheaper layers. If those cheaper layers are still not enough, then ministries, utilities, transport firms, and industrial companies get pulled into the defense effort. That is how a modern state starts building ad hoc air defense depth from the bottom up. Reuters described exactly that. Company-based units integrated into the national network, already downing drones, so frontline forces are not further drained. Impressive? Absolutely. Sustainable substitute for more high-end Western air defense? Not even close. It is innovation under pressure, not freedom from dependence. Now add the Gulf. Britain's current regional posture tells you NATO's problem in one picture. At Dukhan, the joint UK-Qatar 12 Squadron has been flying defensive Typhoon operations as part of the UK-Qatar Defense Partnership. And the British government says those jets have been flying since day one of the conflict in joint defensive operations against incoming Iranian attacks. British pilots have also been involved in missions over Qatar, Bahrain, Jordan, and the UAE. On the ground, British air defense teams are integrating systems into Saudi, Bahraini, and Kuwaiti networks. That means the UK is not merely showing the flag. It is actively embedded in a live regional defensive effort whose political purpose is to protect allies, reassure partners, secure the Strait of Hormuz environment, and stop the crisis from widening. From London's perspective, stripping assets out of that mission to reinforce Ukraine would not look like strategic efficiency. It would look like opening another hole in the wall. And here comes the twist that should hold the whole script together. Ukraine is not only a consumer of air defense now, it is becoming an exporter of anti-drone expertise. Reuters reported that Zelensky sent teams to the Middle East to assess and advise on defense against Iranian drones, and that Kyiv wants money, technology, and potentially deeper defense deals in return. That is remarkable. The same war that is starving Ukraine of high-end interceptors has also turned Ukraine into one of the world's most experienced laboratories for killing Shaheds cheaply. So Kyiv is in the strange position of needing Western air defense missiles while simultaneously teaching other states how to survive the drone age. In one lane, Ukraine is begging for protection. In the other, it is selling hard-earned know-how. That is not a contradiction. That is what wartime adaptation looks like when stockpiles are thin. It also explains why Zelensky floated one of the most revealing ideas in this entire story: swapping Ukrainian interceptor drones for air defense missiles held by Middle Eastern states. Read that again because it says everything. Ukraine understands that NATO does not just have a political problem, it has a distribution problem. Missiles exist, but they are in the hands of states that may now need them for their own defense. Reuters reported that Zelensky said Ukraine would be open to exchanging interceptor drones for missiles from Middle Eastern allies that have their own Patriot stocks. That is not just bargaining. It is a public admission that the contest is now global, and the bottleneck is no longer only money or political will. It is physical inventory, where it sits, and who feels too threatened to give it up.
Маріупольці, які були раніше переміщені на територію підконтрольну Росії, невідомо. Якби ми отримали доступ до всієї тієї зброї, якої потребуємо.
And Britain feels threatened in a very specific way. Not directly by Russian missiles over London, but by the strategic consequences of a wider Gulf war. Hormuz matters. Energy flows matter. The security of British nationals, bases, and partners matters. The UK government has explicitly framed its Middle East moves as collective defense of allies, while trying not to get dragged into the wider war. That balancing act requires visible, credible defensive capability. Sky Sabre in Saudi Arabia, short-range launchers in Bahrain, Rapid Sentry and RAF Orcus in Kuwait, Typhoons extended in Qatar. These are not random deployments. They are signals backed by hardware. Pulling them away would undercut the message Britain is sending to Gulf partners at the exact moment it wants those partners steady, aligned, and confident. There is also an industrial reason NATO will not simply brute force its way out of this in the next few months. Reuters reported that Lockheed Martin's current PAC-3 output has been insufficient for US and allied demand, and that even planned increases will come too late to solve near-term shortages this year. The same Reuters reporting notes that Europe's SAMP/T alternative has not ramped fast enough to erase the problem either. Britain, for its part, is expanding Sky Sabre-related capacity and has said it is doubling its deployable Sky Sabre capability, but that is precisely the point. When a state is doubling a scarce capability, it usually means the capability was scarce to begin with. Production lines can expand, training pipelines can grow, supply chains can be strengthened, but none of that helps the next raid if the next raid is tonight. Wars are fought in calendar time, not procurement PowerPoint time. So when people ask, why won't NATO send it? The answer is harder and more cynical than many people want. It is not just fear of Putin. It is not just bureaucratic inertia. It is not even just alliance caution. It is the brutal arithmetic of overlapping wars. The same alliance that is meant to help Ukraine survive Russia is also trying to stabilize a Gulf theater under Iranian missile and drone pressure. The same families of interceptors are relevant in both places. The same Western air defense crews, planners, and support structures are finite. The same ministers are trying to avoid one war widening while another one grinds on. In that environment, every deployed battery becomes a political statement about whose emergency matters most right now. There is a bigger strategic consequence here for NATO. If the alliance cannot expand missile and air defense capacity fast enough, it will keep improvising with geography. One crisis gets priority this month. Another gets patched with workarounds. Ukraine responds by deepening drone interception, dispersing industry, building domestic missiles, and integrating civilian infrastructure into defense. Gulf states burn through interceptors while trying to hold the line against Iranian attacks. Washington and European capitals shuffle stockpiles, procurement plans, and delivery schedules. That is not a stable model. It works until one theater spikes harder than expected. Then something else goes uncovered. In an air defense, uncovered means dead civilians, damaged industry, blacked out cities, and strategic momentum for the side firing the missiles. So the final takeaway is this. Ukraine is not begging for a British weapon because it loves British branding. It is begging for survivability. But NATO is not looking at a single map anymore.